Alex, I want to pull on the thread that you were mentioning earlier about fiscal policy. So you might argue that the the rise in oil prices acts as an indirect tax for consumers and an income tax in general. And I'm sure we're going to get into later in the conversation about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. But to linger just on the uncertainty around energy prices right now, you also have this dynamic where people have been discussing this more and more about this fiscal cliff that is approaching. The Build Back Better plan did not pass in Congress. There's no prospect, especially if there's a sweep in the midterms, for any meaningful fiscal expansion to happen. So if you consider that we are already facing this fiscal headwind in the U.S. with the addition of the energy uncertainty, isn't there a case to be made that the Fed should actually be considering slowing down or even reversing course with regards to their rhetoric to soften the blow that is likely to come if these things do materialize?
That definitely would make sense to me, and that's why I would favor being very patient rate hikes and but be front load runoff of the balance sheet, because that's something like you can kind of soften the things with that. What I think is going to happen now is they're going to hike rates. They possibly will have a chance to start running off the balance sheet. They're going to have to pause the hikes very quickly. Maybe they'll get 1 or 2 hikes this year. And then, but the balance sheet runoff will be late started and running in the background. And it's like, back to my wave analogy, they'll be off phase. And that was balance sheet runoff might coming late might cause enough of a continuing tightening of financial conditions, in addition to the fiscal issues that you just mentioned. And it's kind of, as I said, an argument whether energy cost serves as a tax or not, or whether like a general fear factor is like we had COVID slowing us down, but who knows, maybe the war in Europe is also will kind of cause some caution on people in terms of traveling, and might be some kind of negative. Typically wars are inflationary, but there could be a component of a negative growth shock there too. So between all the shocks, yeah, that's why I'm kind of biased to think that we're going to be easing in not that distant future.
If Mr. Powell doesn't stumble into another policy error like 2018.
Well, he will. Well,
the easing is a response to the policy.
There is a quote that I used in my book too. I think it's like Grant Williams said it. Fed always hikes till they break something. So we cannot count on them to preemptively get very dovish. I think they're in the corner, but they'll be hawkish relative to where they should be. And they will have to be put before the reality. Now, a very strong sell-off in stock market will change. Remember what I said earlier about like the zeitgeist, the feeling of persistence. When stock market is down, it's much easier to convince yourself that psychologically. So imagine there's a day that Nasdaq is down 2.5%, or versus the day when Nasdaq is up 2.5%. Really, it's only a 5% difference, not that big, right? One day move. But on that day when Nasdaq is down 2.5%, it's much easier even for me to convince myself that the economy is going into recession. It's a very subtle psychological conditioning that's happening. So if the Fed, not because they're trying to like prop stock market and save rich people in some kind of corrupt way that people often talk about, it's just a psychological conditioning. They see assets getting weaker. Eventually it spills into things which are more in their purview, like funding. They see funding getting tighter here and there, credit spreads going wide, assets going weaker. Then it's easier for them to find a pretext to become more dovish. Then next time they see a mixed economic number, they'll say like, maybe we can stop, right?
Yeah.
At first, their first reaction is like, stock market corrected 10%, who cares, right? That's not our purview. That's fine. It was overvalued anyway. This is their first line of thinking, and we cannot really get them to think otherwise. We cannot. As a matter of fact, people always talk about like Powell put or Greenspan put. I was not always surprised of how much this put exists, but how much it does not exist. They actually don't. Like if you look at the actual timing of the actions, they don't react to stock market. They still tightened in 2018, in December 2018. They still tightened in May 2020 when there were corrections happening in stock markets. They need to see that in a combination of some economic data. but it will bias them to being more responsive to economic data. That's what I'm trying to say.